In 861 of the Third Age, Arnor divided into three lesser kingdoms, Arthedain, Cardolan and Arthedain. We're told that for the next 500 years or so, until the ascension of Angmar, these three kingdoms fought each other, resulting in the hastening of the Dunedain. But other than being told that they fought each other, we're never told just how bloody, intense, and often these wars were. So in this video, let's talk about Arnor's civil wars and ask the question about how deadly they might have actually been. Truthfully, we don't know much about the division of Arnor, even though it was one of the biggest, most consequential events of the Third Age. Our greatest hint comes from the appendices, where it's said that after Eärendil, the 10th king of Arnor, the kingdom was divided owing to dissension amongst his sons. Evidently, for one reason or another, Eärendil's other sons rejected the claim of Amlaeth, the eldest son. Maybe they viewed him as illegitimate or weak, or perhaps they were just plain power-hungry. Whatever the exact reason, it doesn't seem like the division of Arnor was intentionally devised or was amicable. And even more importantly, Amlaeth didn't have the strength or will to deal with his younger brothers and end the rebellion, so the realms of Arthedain and Cardolan became entrenched, ruled by sub-branches of the line of Isildur. Next, we're told in at least two places that they fought amongst themselves. The appendices tell us there was often strife between the kingdoms, which hastened the waning of the Dunedain. The chief matter of debate was the possession of the Weather Hills and the land westward towards Bree. Both Arthedain and Cardolan desired to possess Amon Sul, Weathertop, which stood on the borders of their realms, for the Tower of Amon Sul held the chief Palantir of the north, and the other two were both in the keeping of Arthedain. When entertaining the hobbits, Tom Bombadil also spins a tale which describes the history of the Barrow Downs, owned by Cardolan. Green walls and white walls rose. There were fortresses on the heights, kings of little kingdoms fought together, and the young sun shone like fire on the red metal of their new and greedy swords. There was victory and defeat, and towers fell, fortresses were burned, and flames went up into the sky. Gold was piled on the biers of dead kings and queens, and mountains covered them, and the stone doors were shut, and the grass grew over all. The third sentence, the one mentioning that kings of little kingdoms fought together, is the most important. Now, in most circumstances, fought together would mean that they fought alongside each other, as allies, probably against Angmar. But the second line about their new and greedy swords implies a negative. Is a sword greedy if you're using it in self-defense? Surely not. But if you're a king of a little kingdom fighting against another king of a little kingdom, for land, for Amon Sul, for a Palantiri, then yeah, I think that sword is greedy. Interestingly, these are the only two descriptions of the problems between Arthedain, Cardolan and Arthedain that I could find, and neither description is incredibly damning. By that I mean, neither description paints Arnor as drowning in blood, unlike the Kinstrife civil war in Gondor, which saw a brutal sacking of the capital city and a large battle with many losses. But these two civil wars might have been very different. The Kinstrife civil war lasted for just 15 years, and the war was only hot for about 5 to 6 of those years, and while Eldacar and Castamir belonged to the same dynasty, it was an ideological war at heart. Castamir's side wanted supremacy of the coastlands and the navy, and rejected Greater Northman influence in Gondor. Basically, they might have just been racist. This was a war with high stakes for everyone, and it even led to the Northmen of Rhovanion, a separate kingdom, getting involved on Eldacar's side. The Arnorian Civil War lasted for over 400 years, and beyond that when you consider that Arthedain eventually sided with Angmar. Obviously, this civil war isn't going to be hot most of the time, at least not in the sense that large battles were being fought, but there could have been plenty of skirmishes and minor battles, plenty of opportunities to do cumulative damage when you consider who was probably fighting the most in these wars. The Dunedain, possibly without the support of many of their native subjects. You see, Arnor's strife was ultimately a dynastic struggle, not ideological as far as we know, with each branch of Isildur's line trying to prove legitimacy. In this, Arthedain had the clear advantage as the eldest line, the strongest kingdom, the controller of the ancient capital, and controller of all three northern Palantiri. What this means is that, unlike the Kin strife, which affected everyone because it was essentially determining Gondorian policy, both internal and foreign, the Arnorian Wars only really affected those, mostly Dunedain you would assume, who had staked their fortunes to each of the Arnorian contenders. It's important to remember that the Dunedain in Arnor were a minority. Much of the population of the kingdom was middlemen, or at least those of mixed heritage. In Arthedain, it seems to have been more so the men of Eriador, those who were related to the House of Beor and who had gotten along well with the Númenóreans in the past. In Cardolan, it seems to be men who were related to the Gwaitharim, the Dunlendings, as those who survived in Bree were. In Rhudaur, it was the Hillmen, whose exact origin is unknown. With the exception of probably the men of Eriador, and probably at least some of the middlemen in Cardolan, these men were likely indifferent to Arnor or even outright hostile to the kingdom, like the Hillmen, not the sorts of people who were going to be pointlessly sacrificing themselves in a dynastic civil war. To them, the three branches of the line of Isildur were probably just three heads of the same beast. So who then does the fighting in these conflicts? Well, it's the Dunedain themselves, and I'd wager that the royal houses played a significant role in that fighting. While this probably means that the conflicts weren't so deadly in terms of raw numbers, they still would have significantly weakened the three kingdoms. While it's never explicitly stated, I think it's a safe guess that the wars contributed to the lines of Isildur dying out in both Cardolan and Rhudaur. This is what causes King Argaleb of Arthedain to then claim all of Arnor. After that, we see the huge effects of the war. In Rhudaur, the Dunedain weaken themselves so much that they can no longer maintain control over the kingdom. This causes the local hillmen to seize power and eventually end up siding with Angmar. At this point, Rhudaur is no longer a successor state of Arnor, it's a rogue state that's trying to overthrow the whole thing, and the hillmen are still powerful enough to be a major threat, because I think they weren't the ones suffering during the civil wars. Those Dunedain who remain in Rhudaur are either killed or forced to flee when the kingdom is effectively annexed by Angmar in 1409. As for Cardolan, we see how pointless the dynastic struggle was because when Argaleb claims Arnor, they simply fall in line and basically become a vassal state under Arthedain ruled by a prince. But even in Cardolan, we sort of see how central Dunedain authority might have been weakened by the wars. After 1409, a remnant of the Dunedain hold out in the Barrow Downs, but they seemingly have little power projection beyond that. The rest of the men of Cardolan who dwell across the wide plains of Minhiriath or down in Tharbad remain somewhat independent until they are mostly wiped out by the Great Plague. This makes me wonder whether Cardolan bent the knee to Arthedain specifically because the Dunedain there were worried about sharing the same fate as those in Rhudaur. In Tolkien's earlier drafts, he also had Cardolan fall to evil alongside Rhudaur. I think Arthedain fared better, not just because it was bigger and stronger, but because it was the true heart of Arnor. It had the most Dunedain, the most loyal native population, and the most legitimacy. The full weight of the kingdom was behind Amleth and his descendants, whereas it seems likely that Isildur's descendants in Rhudaur and Cardolan did not have that same luxury. But even when it came to Arthedain, it could not stand alone against Angmar. Now keep in mind, a lot of this is speculation. We don't truly know how these civil wars went, but based off the descriptions, the vagueness, and the consequences, I don't think the civil wars saw widespread destruction beyond the contested area around Amon Sul. I don't think the civil wars led to massive depopulation. Instead, I think the decline was mostly limited to the Dunedain, the royal line, nobility, which ultimately weakened the administrations, particularly in Rhudaur, and possibly in Cardolan to an extent as well. This meant that when Angmar came knocking, they found the Dunedain weak, but it wasn't necessarily the same for some of their subjects who were keen to see them gone. But like I said, this is all speculation and I could be wrong. The civil wars could have seen large invasions, bloody battles, the sacking of cities and fortresses. They could have seen the hillmen or the middlemen take heavy losses, used as meat shields by the Dunedain elite. Perhaps that's why they became disloyal to them. Perhaps when Angmar arose, large parts of Arnor were already depopulated thanks to these wars. We just don't know, but I hope you value my speculation nonetheless. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. As you know, I'm always looking for more excuses for more Arnor videos, so let me know if there's anything you would like to know about the kingdom, maybe we can get a video out of it. Cheers, farewell, and remember, I genuinely can't think of anything to say which causes me to delay finishing the script, recording it, and then putting out a video, and it's just not worth it sometimes, so I guess I'm just saying this instead.